Good morning, Giants fans, and welcome to your Valentine's Views podcast for Monday. Please like, share, and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. And please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts across the Big Blue View Radio Network. All right, Giants with a gut-wrenching, heartbreaking, disappointing 14-9 loss to the Buffalo Bills on Sunday night, a game that they easily could have won, really, with different results on two plays. Here to help me discuss all of the action, as we always do, the morning after games, is Big Blue View's Tony DelGenio. Morning, Tony. How are you? How much
Oh,
sleep did you get last night?
I'm doing all right, Ed. I only got a few hours sleep, maybe 4.
I got more than I should have. I got up late this morning. Everything's running behind schedule. But it is what it is. And here we are. And let's dive right into it. Obviously, 14-9 lost at the Giants, much closer, much better effort than most people anticipated. And yet a lot of disappointment. We have to talk about the final play of the first half. And I think we all know, Tyrod Taylor messed up. You just can't run the ball in that situation. He checked to a running play. He said he thought there would be time to spike the ball if the play failed. Obviously, he miscalculated, which is really disappointing for a guy that's been in the league as long as he has. But here's my question for you, Tony. I was a little bit surprised at how forthright Brian Dable was immediately after the game in saying, that's on the quarterback, that's on Tyrod Taylor, he screwed up. Are you at all surprised that Brian Dable didn't cover for Taylor a little bit?
Yeah, and I noticed a lot of people commenting on that last night. I was a little bit surprised that he wasn't more non-committal about it, but I do think it was an awful call. I think that if you were looking at Tommy DeVito making that call, then it's a different story. But a guy who's been in the league as long as Tyrod Taylor, I I have to admit, as soon as I saw him hand off, I said, "What are you doing handing off?"
Well, God forbid Daniel Jones had made that alert and handed the ball to Barkley and it didn't work.
Yeah.
He'd be crucified, run out of town, and it just the Jones hatred just wouldn't stop. And for me, yeah, I get the fact that Taylor, it's his first start for the Giants in 2 years. It's his first really truly meaningful football in a long time. And yet he's been in the league for 13 years. He's 34 years old. He's started a ton of games. He has to know better. Maybe if there's 25 seconds, you can get away with running that because you probably have time to spike the ball and still kick the field goal. But he has to know how much time it's going to take to get out of the pile and get lined up and get a ball spiked, because the Giants
Mhm.
didn't. There was no chance they were going to get the ball spiked, and that is purely on Tyrod Taylor. He took the blame for it after the game, and yet, I was a little bit surprised still that Brian Dable didn't say, well, he had a run option there and he chose it and it just didn't work. I was a little bit surprised that he said, that he basically said that's on Tyrod.
Yeah, I was too. On the other hand, I think he's obviously very frustrated with the way things have gone this season, and I think he saw a winnable game last night start to slip out of his hands, and so I kind of get the frustration, and he was obviously very frustrated because he apparently spoke to who was it? Melissa Stark was the sideline reporter, I believe, and I guess she tried to interview him as they were going off the field for halftime, and he just said, "Oh, it's like, I'm sorry, I just can't do this right now."
I can't. Yeah, he said I can't. He said right now I can't think straight or something like
Yeah,
that. And
yeah.
and yeah, so
No, it's a human thing to do.
and absolutely, and it was a human mistake by Tyrod Taylor. Unfortunately, when push comes to shove, and we'll get into how the game ended in a second. When push comes to shove, that is the play that cost the Giants the game. I mean, an opportunity to, whether it was 9-0 or 13-0, there's no excuse for not coming out of there without points and going into the locker room up 2 scores. And when you think about it, we can talk about how the game ended, but Giants get points at the end of the first half. They don't need a touchdown at the end of that game. All they need is a field goal, and they're in obvious position even before the final play of regulation pass interference that was called in the end zone. They're in position to kick that field goal, and Graham Gano is going to make that. So, yeah, so that play ultimately cost them a massive upset.
Yeah, and I think that's why he was so upset about it. Again, it's not a great look for a head coach to be saying that publicly, but I think he probably saw this as the Giants' last chance to climb back into the playoff race, and he saw then an opening for Buffalo to come back and take the game, which they did. I mean, and it obscures the fact that overall Tyrod Taylor played a good game, a very good game, I think, for the Giants, and overall the Giants played an excellent game. I mean, they had the lead till the end of the third quarter, and even after Josh Allen finally started doing Josh Allen things in the fourth quarter. I mean, like that pass for the winning score was a pass that very few quarterbacks can make, I think. Still, the Giants fought back and they drove down and were in position to win the game. And so I think this was by far the Giants' best game of the season. And to not come away with a win, I'm sure hurts a lot.
Absolutely. Tony, let's talk about the final play. Giants get the pass interference in the end zone on the final timed play. They get an untimed play from the 1-yard line. And as I wrote in the Kudos and Wet Willies on Monday morning, my view of this is, look, yes, it was pass interference, but unless you were brand new to sports last night, you understand that this is about the millionth time that officials have swallowed the whistle on a game-deciding play at the end of the game. Sometimes you're going to get that call. Sometimes you're not going to get that call. If you're on defense, it's a great call. If you're on offense, it stinks. But for me, I'm just not going to kill the officials for not throwing that flag on that play. I can't do it. I know Giants fans are upset about it, but that's just how things go in sports, most of the time.
Well, I'm with the Giants fans on this one. I have to admit that.
Oh, I understand. I understand it, Tony. I understand the frustration.
Well,
I just can't kill the officials for it.
Yeah, the point I would make is that as long as you let defensive backs get away with doing that, then they're going to continue to do it, and they're going to continue to do it, until it gets so egregious that it's ridiculous. And I thought he held him on the second play. I mean, there was the whole jersey pulling thing, right? And I didn't think that what he did was any better or worse than the play that was called on James Bradbury in the Super Bowl that basically allowed Kansas City to win the Super Bowl. And so if they could call that play in that situation at a key juncture in the Super Bowl, they could call this. And I guess maybe more to the point, sometimes I don't trust myself since I'm not an expert, but you had Chris Collinsworth saying he thought it was a hold, and then he convinced Terry McAulay up in the studio that it was a hold. And and so I guess my question is really, is the whole system for deciding on penalties and changes of calls on the field, is that whole system broken, and does there need to be more of an option to get somebody up in the booth, correct a call on the field when the film clearly shows that he had his jersey pulled before the ball was even coming to him. And so that's the type of thing I wonder about a lot. I wonder about whether the referees have a sense of why rules are in there and why penalties are called when they're called. And I worry that some of them worry too much about the letter of the rule and not enough about the spirit of the rule and why the rule exists and what it's trying to do. The one that I think of was a long pass to I think it was Jalen Hyatt, maybe, that was called back by an illegal man downfield on Evan Neal, and that was a play we saw in the Dallas Thanksgiving game last year. It wasn't Evan Neal that time; it was one of the other offensive linemen who got it. And I understand why they have a call like that in the playbook, but when the offense is so minor and the play is going nowhere near where that offense supposedly occurs, the idea of calling a penalty on that, to me, goes against the spirit of why the rule is in there. And so in the case of the last play of the game, we know that the rule is in there precisely to try to avoid the type of thing that the defensive back was doing to Waller on that play. And I have to admit, I thought, even though it was the second time in a row, and in the back of my mind, I thought, well, they're not going to call that twice in a row. Just because you think they're not going to call it twice in a row doesn't mean it was a good idea or the right thing not to call it twice in a row.
Oh, if I'm the Buffalo defensive back, I'd do exactly what he
Yeah.
did too. I mugged Darren Waller, and I basically dare the official to call it again, and he didn't. And as I said, whether it's right or it's wrong, that is, we see it all the time. There have been calls over the years that have benefited the Giants. There have been plenty of calls. There are still people who are screaming that Richie Soybert was interfered with on the final play in the Trey Junkin game.
Mm-hmm,
So,
mm-hmm.
so
Oh yeah. That
so
was a terrible call too.
oh yeah, it was. But but those things unfortunately happen, and I come back to the Giants. Should have won this game on their own. But what I will say is you're absolutely right about the Evan Neal play, and I was going to bring it up, if you didn't. And I do agree with you about the spirit of some of the rules. It drives me crazy when a penalty that happened 30 or 40 yards away from the play that had nothing to do with the play changes, a third down to a first down, or takes away a big play, which is what the Neal penalty did last night. That was a clear example of, he was engaged in a double team. And I think it was he and Marcus McKethan, push the defensive lineman down the field a little bit. When Neal disengaged, he was a yard and a half or 2 yards beyond the line of scrimmage, didn't advance up the field any further, just stayed put. Maybe he should have backed up. I don't know, but it had nothing to do with the play. And I'm with you that those kinds of things, I do think the NFL needs to look at. Do we really need to make that call in that spot?
Yeah. And the most egregious thing, and this did not come into play last night, is what they've done with the roughing the passer penalty. And they've gone so far in trying to protect quarterbacks that you make it almost impossible in some situations to actually sack a quarterback. I think there was one called on, was it Leonard Williams last week? Or the week before that was he was coming in. Yeah. And you just look at some of these things, that's not what they intend to mean by protecting the quarterback against a bad hit. And so I'm just so amazed at how reluctant the NFL seems to be to actually make changes in these things when clearly something is wrong. I mean, they've done some very good things as far as protecting players against, helmet to helmet hits and things like that. Even when the helmet to helmet hits are unintentional, still, I get it why they call a penalty. But sometimes they just go too far in what they're intending to do, and they just don't seem to have a sense of this is the right thing to do in this situation, in this point in the game, and so on and so forth.
Right, and I think a lot of that has to do with so much television now and so many cameras, and it's it's what baseball has become now too. It's the absolute letter of the law versus the spirit of the law, and does this need to be called? There was a roughing the passer on Bobby Okereke last night that
Oh,
that was
yeah.
another
Yep.
example of there was nothing wrong with that hit, but the letter of the law, the way the NFL is going to call it, anything that looks like
Mhm.
anything that looks reasonably close to forcible contact against a quarterback is going to get called, and that's just as you said, it's over the top, it's too far, but you almost expect a flag to be thrown every time a quarterback gets touched.
Yeah, yeah. And,
And
yeah, I mean, it really takes away from the game because you don't want referee calls to be protecting the players against the other team unfairly taking advantage in a situation. You don't want them to determine the outcome of game themselves just because of what the rule specifically says.
Tony, let's talk about a couple of other things here. And I think we have to start with Mr. Straight Off the Couch, Justin Pugh. Um, I talked to Pugh in Giants locker room on Wednesday, I think it was, and he said that he had no idea if he could play more than maybe 20 snaps. He was wearing a big brace. He's sitting at his locker, taking the big brace off his knee. Sunday was almost a year to the day of his surgery for a torn ACL. This is a 33-year-old man who had one padded practice before playing on Sunday night. And I don't care what the Pro Football Focus grades say. I really don't. I don't care that he gave up 2 sacks. He started at left guard, was doing a good job, got shoved out to left tackle, and I think the man has played 5 snaps at left tackle since 2015. For him to go out there and play 77 snaps and play reasonably well was just an amazing, amazing thing that he deserves to be commended for.
Yeah, I started to write my piece that'll be finished later today on the PFF grades and snap counts for the game, and I said at the beginning of the piece that I've decided that I'm game ready for the NFL because, like Justin Pugh, I've been sitting on the couch, and apparently that's how you train to play in an NFL game. And he had said, right, that he figured he'd be good for like 20-25 snaps, and he wound up
Well,
playing every snap in the game
Pew
coming
does a
straight.
podcast too. He does a podcast
And
too. So we're there on both
yeah, yes,
counts,
I feel
Tony.
like I have a lot in common with Justin Pugh. I'm undersized for an offensive lineman too. That's the other thing that's amazing about Justin Pugh. He's not a big guy.
No, he said in the locker room that when he walked in and started introducing himself to people after the Giants signed him, he said, guys were looking at him like, "You're an offensive lineman?" Because a lot of the guys, younger guys, 10 years younger than he is, didn't know who he was. And the thing of it is, Pugh is a lot lighter than he was even a year ago as a Cardinal.
Yeah.
He was probably 310, 315, and he was asked in the locker room what he weighs. He weighs 292 pounds, which that is amazingly light for a guy who's trying to play guard in the NFL. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with losing weight to take pressure off his knee.
Yeah.
But that is really, really light for an NFL offensive lineman. Yeah, I can't give him enough credit for what he did last night. And honestly, as I wrote in the kudos and wet willies, the offensive line was fine. I actually liked the idea. I know that Giants fans are down on Mark Glowinski, but I liked the idea of Glowinski going back to his natural position at right guard. Had to move across to the left side, when Pugh had to move out to left tackle. But I thought that the Giants offensive line did fine last night. I thought they ran the ball finally. For once, they stuck with the run, even though it wasn't working because they were trying to shorten that game. They moved the pocket with Tyrod Taylor, which they haven't done enough with Daniel Jones. They've kind of made Jones a sitting target in the pocket. They moved the pocket. They got the ball out of Tyrod Taylor's hands. But I did think the offensive line gave him a chance last night. And while it wasn't fantastic, they deserve some credit just because, once again, they're in a makeshift situation last night after the Azudu injury.
Yeah, and to me, last night was a combination of, I would say, at least three different things. One being that I did think the offensive line played better, and it's hard not to conclude that Justin Pugh had an effect on that. I mean, obviously, when he went out to left tackle, sure, Von Miller got around him a couple of times. He gave up pressure on the final play of the game, and so if Tyrod had any thoughts of going anywhere else except Waller, you could forget about it because whoever was rushing off that side was about to get to him. And so, yeah, you expect that when someone like that moves out to the outside when they're used to playing guard. But I thought that the offensive line just looked better overall last night, and I can't believe that he didn't have an effect on not just his own immediate responsibilities, but just on the rest of the line itself. And I'm just worried that the Giants don't seem to have an alpha male on the offensive line. I mean, Evan Neal's a quiet guy. Andrew Thomas is a quiet guy too. As great as he is, he's a quiet guy too. They don't seem to have any like real bullies on that offensive line. Glowinski, although he's a veteran, seems to be a very quiet kind of guy who just kind of does his business. And I feel like they can use somebody who's a little bit more of a vocal leader, and maybe Pugh gave them that last night. But I thought overall the line played better. The other thing, though, obviously, is that it sure helps to have Saquon Barkley back. Even Saquon Barkley still nursing a high ankle sprain, and you could see that he wasn't his 100% self last night. He couldn't make the cuts that he usually does, and I didn't think he had the speed that you usually see from him. But just having him back in there, I think, makes a big difference in the running game, because you know that if you can give this guy a little bit of an opening, he can get through it. And I think the one advantage that Tyrod Taylor gives you is that he has great escapability in the pocket, and so he's a plus when it comes to making pressure not be the disaster that it would be for a less mobile quarterback. And so, and as you say, they moved the pocket, they did other things too. So overall, I thought the game plan was good, and I thought that the people who played in the game did a good job under the circumstances that were there last night. And for such a disheartening loss, and to have it come at this point in the season when they desperately needed a win to kind of stay in anything like the division race, I didn't I wasn't that broken after the game was over. I just kind of took solace from the fact that I thought they by far played the best game they've played this season last night against a very good opponent, and that's not bad.
No, it really isn't, Tony, and maybe 100% Barkley. I think on the 33 or 34-yard run, maybe he pops that, for a big play. I do think Barkley's presence in the game, one of the things that I thought the Giants did that we've been screaming about at Big Blue View, even in the first couple of games that Barkley did play, is they stuck with the run, because the run didn't work until late in the game when Barkley popped a couple of those runs. And I think maybe Saquon's presence in the game sort of helped the Giants say, we're just going to keep trying because we know sooner or later we'll get a hole, we'll get something, we'll get some plays. I'm not sure they would have done that if they were handing the ball to Matt Breida and Eric Gray. And so, yeah, Saquon Barkley's presence definitely, a huge thing for the Giants. Tony, one thing that we didn't talk about earlier in the show that I had wanted to talk about, the play call on the final play. I've seen people screaming online, "Fire Kafka! Why are you just throwing up a jump ball? On the final play of the game. Why aren't there other options?" And as you said, first of all, there was pressure, and second of all, something I say all the time that coaches say and don't follow their own words often enough is it's about players. It's not about plays. I don't care what the play call was. I honestly don't care. If you're going to throw the football with the game on the line with one play in that situation from the 1 yard line, the ball absolutely has to go to Darren Waller. 6'6", 250 something pound guy, your best receiver, your biggest target. As far as I'm concerned, I don't care what the play call was. And Brian Daboll said the Giants had a good play for that. He said he was fine with the call. The ball went to the right player. It just fell incomplete. We can argue about the non-call and the penalty, but I don't want to hear, oh, terrible play call by Kafka, because the ball went to the correct player.
I agree completely with that. I had no problems with them going back to Waller. That's one of the things that you got Waller for, was
Absolutely.
to be that big target in the end zone.
I remember 2 years ago, and we know how the Kenny Golladay tenure ended in New York, or went in New York. But in one of his very first games as a Giant, the Giants got the ball on a turnover with the game on the line inside the 20-yard line. They signed Kenny Golladay to a mega contract to be a game-changing difference maker, especially in the red zone. And I think they ran the ball 3 times. And Golladay was upset. I remember seeing the TV camera pan to the sideline, and he was upset, and he was rightly upset, because the Giants had signed him to be the guy that made a difference in those situations, and they didn't give him a chance. Whatever the play call was, the Giants gave the proper player a chance to make a play. It just didn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a good defense that they're going up against last night. And so to be in position, first of all, to just actually get that winning score at the end and drive downfield on that defense, I thought is a great thing in and of itself. And I had absolutely no problem with them going back to Waller. And again, I thought he was held on that second final play of the game, just as he was on the first play. And so I think it's no fault of Waller that he did not catch that pass. He was not allowed to jump up where he could have in order to get that pass. Tyra threw it a little bit high, but I think that's a pass that Waller can go up and get if he's not held.
If he's able to use 2 hands, sure, he can catch that ball. But again, zero problem with the play call. The ball went to the player it needed to go to, if you weren't going to try to hand it to Saquon in that situation. So no problem with that at all. Something else that was interesting last night, Tony, was, and I'm sure you've seen the snap counts this morning, the Giants 0 snaps for Sterling Shepard, no offensive snaps for Paris Campbell, only 18 for Isaiah Hodgins. The Giants went with Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton, and Jalen Hyatt at wide receiver almost exclusively. And I have to admit that I really like that. I like, just, you get Hyatt out there and let the kid play. And the same with Robinson.
Well, it's speed. And basically what I think the Giants did last night was they just ran a lot more 1-1 personnel than they have previously, and a lot less 1-2 personnel. So when they're in 1-2, it looks like Slayton and Hodgins now are the two guys in 1-2, and Isaiah Hodgins only had 18 snaps last night. Slayton was out there all the time, so he's the Iron Man. And as you say, Wandale and Hyatt, and you can see the offensive philosophy that I think that they're putting together. I mean, Wandale, so Wandale Robinson, I mean, I have such conflicting emotions about Wandale Robinson. You look and see what George Pickens has become for Pittsburgh, and he's become a really nice X-type receiver for the Steelers. And that he was on the board when the Giants picked in the second round. And so I have to admit I have regrets about the Giants not going in that direction. But that having been said, Wandale Robinson is now their guy to get first downs and keep the chains moving. They targeted him 8 times last night. He had 8 receptions. And granted, it's all short stuff, so it's not as if they're tremendously difficult balls.
But it's move the chain stuff. How many of those? I'd have to go back and look, but a lot of those went for first downs.
Mm-hmm.
And there was, I mentioned this morning in the Kudos and Wet Willies. Maybe it was Tyrod Taylor. Maybe it was the fact that there was a little bit more time. Maybe it was scheme, but there were a couple of occasions where Robinson actually got to run with the football after he caught it, which we hadn't seen in earlier games.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so using him in that way, I don't know that he's ever going to be the flashy wow type of receiver that Pickens can be, or a number of other guys can be, but as the goal is to move the chains, right? I mean, the goal is to score, but you've got to move the chains in order to do that. And then we haven't talked about Hyatt, but obviously that's the other side of the equation is the guy to throw too deep. I mean, I thought if anything, Tyrod Taylor threw deep a little bit too much last night. He threw one pass to Hyatt that Hyatt did not catch way downfield, where Hyatt was actually double covered. And so I was wondering what he was doing, throwing that particular ball. And I'm not sure I want to see someone the size of Hyatt going up with 2 defenders on him trying to catch the ball. But I did like the idea that they were finally trying to find him in this offense and give him chances to make plays. And he made a couple of plays for them last night, not just deep plays. Also, he got a first down on a shorter plate as well, and so I think that's got to become an important part of the Giants' offense. And it's obvious with those people that they're putting out there most of the time that they're trying to emphasize speed over anything else. Isaiah Hodgins just doesn't see the ball much anymore. He didn't get targeted even once last night, even though he was on the field for 18 snaps. So speed is where they're directing that offense.
Absolutely. Tony, as we said, I mean, best effort of the season overall for the Giants last night. And I mean, I know that the other day I accused you of losing your mind when you pushed your chips to the center of the table and said the Giants would make the playoffs. And whether they do or not, I don't think they're making the playoffs at 1-5. And yet let's just kind of spin forward 11 games left. I think a lot of this gauntlet of the first 6 games is over with now. There's still a lot of difficult games on the schedule, but overall, the way the defense is playing, some of the things that the Giants showed on offense last night, I think it's okay to feel optimistic that the rest of the season will be better than what we've seen so far.
Yeah, and I think a functional offense obviously has to be part of it. And so if they can solidify that line a little bit more, then they can have a functional offense. And I mean, now we've got Andrew Thomas, looks like he's going to be out for half the season, having played less than a quarter in game 1. And so I mean, obviously, you have to get him back in order for this to happen. You've got to get John Michael Schmitz back and give him a chance to settle in at center. But if what we saw last night from Justin Pugh was an indication, it looks like he can still play. And so you could imagine going into the second half of the season that they actually have a left side of the offensive line. If Thomas comes back, they actually have a left side of the line that has at least some experience and has some talent. And that still leaves question marks on the right hand side of the line, but frankly, Evan Neal is playing a little bit better. I mean, he's not up to the point where he's not a liability yet, but I think he's actually playing a little bit better than he was early. And so there are reasons for cautious hope about the offensive line. And if you get that just functioning normally, doesn't have to be Philadelphia Eagles level offensive line play or Detroit Lions level offensive line play. If you just get that functioning normally, then it's obvious that the Giants have some weapons they can do things with to be a dangerous option. The flip side, which we haven't talked about at all so far in this broadcast, is that the Giants defense is becoming pretty good. They're not totally a shutdown defense, but they did hold a Josh Allen led offense to 14 points and not a single point until the fourth quarter. And I thought that's pretty darn good job by an offense against by a defense against an offense that put 48 points up against Miami a few weeks ago.
Absolutely. Bobby Okereke has really begun to show why the Giants signed him. I will say this too. It went, although not by Chris Collinsworth, but it went largely unnoticed that the Giants were unafraid to match Tay Banks against Stephon Diggs last night. And Tay Banks did a good job in the reps against Stephon Diggs. That young man has not gotten any interceptions. He really doesn't have more than one or two passes defensed, but that young man is turning into a good player. And that's a good sign. Cordell Flott had a nice night last night. A little bit disturbing sometimes that even with Dexter Lawrence and Leonard Williams in the middle, that the Bills were able to pretty much run the ball down the Giants' throats when they wanted to in the second half. No big plays allowed, but they were able to get enough running to move the chains and keep the football. But a lot of good signs. Kayvon Thibodeau, very, very little on the stat sheet last night. And yet I'm not complaining about the way Thibodeau played either. So
I think Thibodeau would have been on the stat sheet more if it was not for the fact that the guy that he was chasing was Josh Allen, because Josh Allen, I mean, he's one of the most amazing players in the NFL, and he kept a lot of that from being more of a disaster for his own offense by the way he can get away from pressure.
Absolutely. So a lot of good signs last night. A really unfortunate loss. It would have been really nice for the Giants to win that game, but in the end, it's kind of about the long term, and it's still about the long term for this team. And I do think there were some good signs. So, Tony, was there anything else you wanted to mention before we call it a show?
No, that's it. I thought Jamie Gillen had another nice night punting, and all of a sudden, I think of him as an asset to the team and not a liability. And naturally, Graham Gano is always there and so underappreciated, but
Giants fans, go back and read the story I did about Gillen a few days ago at Big Blue View. And in case you guys are wondering and haven't read it, Gillen, for what it's worth, has spent an awful lot of time studying former Giants great punter Jeff Fiegels. So, and you're right, he's been fantastic. So, we hate to be at the point of the season where we're talking about the punter all the time, though.
Well, let's see if they can get a few wins in the next few weeks, and
Absolutely.
maybe the mood will be a little better. At least they looked last night like the team that we thought they might look like this year.
And I think that was the most encouraging thing. They didn't get in the end zone, but they were highly competitive against a really good team. They looked like they had a plan. They looked like they had a chance. And it's hard to complain, when they play that way.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please stay safe out there. Take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye bye.